Voyageurs National Park, Minnesota. Date November 19th, 2008. The coffee had gone cold in Derek's thermos by the time he noticed. He'd been standing at the edge of the Cabotagama Lake overlook for nearly 20 minutes, watching the fog crawl across the water like something alive, something with intention. November in Voyageurs meant short days and long silences, the kind of quiet that settled into your bones and stayed there through April. After 6 years with the Park Service, Derek had learned to appreciate that silence. It was honest. The woods didn't pretend to be anything other than what they were: vast, indifferent, and older than memory. He poured the cold coffee onto the frozen ground and screwed the cap back on, tucking the thermos into his pack. The morning patrol was routine. Check the boat launches for any vehicles that shouldn't be there. Verify the trail markers along the Cruiser Lake trail system. Make sure no one had ignored the closure signs on the northern peninsula. Most visitors had cleared out weeks ago, driven south by the dropping temperatures and the promise of easier winters elsewhere. The few who remained were usually ice fishermen testing their luck on the early freeze, or photographers hoping to capture the brutal beauty of the boundary waters before the heavy snows came. Derek's boots crunched against the frost-hardened trail as he made his way back toward his truck. The air carried that particular smell of late autumn in the North Woods: pine resin, decaying leaves, and something metallic underneath it all, like the lake itself was breathing iron into the wind. He'd grown up in Duluth, close enough to know these forests, but far enough to still feel humbled by their scale. Voyageurs covered over 200,000 acres of interconnected waterways, islands, and ancient boreal forest. You could walk for days and never see another human being. That was the appeal for most visitors. It was also, Derek knew, what made the park dangerous for those who underestimated it. His radio crackled as he reached the truck. "Unit 4, this is dispatch. You copy?" Derek keyed the mic. "Dispatch, Unit 4. Go ahead." "Got a vehicle registered to a Samantha Reeves blue Honda CR-V parked at the Ash River Visitor Center lot. Registration shows she checked in for a 3-day backcountry permit on the 16th. She was due back yesterday evening. No contact, no sign out." Derek checked his watch. 8:43 in the morning. If she'd been due back last night and hadn't shown, that was already 14 hours overdue. In summer, that might mean a sprained ankle or a wrong turn. In November, with temperatures dropping into the single digits after dark, it meant something else entirely. "Copy that. Dispatch. I'm en route to Ash River now. Can you pull her permit details and have them ready?" "Already on it." She logged the Cruiser Lake loop with a camp at Jorgens Lake. Solo hiker. Solo. Derek felt the first cold finger of unease trace down his spine. Solo hikers in November were rare, and the ones who attempted it were either extremely experienced or dangerously naive. He hoped Samantha Reeves was the former. ETA 20 minutes, Unit 4 out. The drive to Ash River took him along County Road 129, a winding 2-lane that hugged the southern boundary of the park. The fog had thickened as the morning progressed, reducing visibility to perhaps 100 yards. Derek drove slowly, scanning the tree line out of habit. The forest pressed close on both sides, a wall of bare birch and dark spruce that seemed to lean toward the road as if listening. He thought about what old Tom Birchwood had told him during his first winter at Voyageurs. Tom had worked the park for 32 years before retiring, and he'd seen things he didn't talk about except in fragments, usually after his third beer at the Ash River Lodge. "The Ojibwe knew," Tom had said once, staring into his glass. "They knew there were places in these woods where you don't go, not because of the cold, not because of the wolves, because something lives out there that remembers when this land was nothing but ice and hunger, and it's still hungry." Derek had dismissed it as old-timer superstition at the time. He wasn't so sure anymore. Samantha had started her hike 3 days ago with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. She had the right gear: layered clothing, a 4-season tent, a sleeping bag rated to -20, enough food for 5 days in case weather delayed her return. She'd grown up hiking in the boundary waters with her father, who'd taught her to read the land, to respect the cold, to never assume the wilderness was her friend. The first day had been perfect, cold but clear, the trail well marked despite the thin layer of snow that had fallen the week before. She'd made camp at Jorgen's Lake by mid-afternoon, set up her tent on a flat stretch of ground near the water's edge, and spent the evening watching the stars emerge one by one in the deepening dark. The silence was absolute. Not the silence of a city park, where you could still hear distant traffic or the hum of electricity, but a true silence, the kind that made your own heartbeat sound loud. She'd noticed the first wrong thing on the morning of her second day: tracks in the snow around her campsite that hadn't been there when she'd gone to sleep. Large tracks, larger than a wolf's, with an elongated stride that suggested something walking on two legs. She'd told herself it was a bear, a late-season black bear not yet settled into hibernation, perhaps drawn by the smell of her food bag hung high in a tree 50 yards from her tent. The tracks led in a wide circle around her campsite, as if something had been pacing, watching, deciding. Then they disappeared into the tree line heading north. Samantha had packed up quickly that morning, eager to put distance between herself and whatever had visited in the night. The trail took her around the eastern shore of Jorgen's Lake and into a stretch of dense spruce forest where the canopy blocked most of the pale November light. The temperature had dropped since the previous day, and her breath came out in thick white plumes that hung in the still air before slowly dissipating. That was when she realized she could no longer hear birds. She stopped walking and stood perfectly still, listening. Nothing. Not the rustle of squirrels in the underbrush, not the distant tap of a woodpecker, not even the creak of branches in the wind. The forest had gone silent around her in a way that felt deliberate, as if someone had pressed a mute button on the world. "Hello?" she called, and immediately felt foolish. But the word fell flat against the trees and died without echo, swallowed by the pressing silence. She walked faster. Derek found Samantha's Honda exactly where dispatch had described it, alone in the Ash River lot, a thin layer of frost coating its windows. He parked beside it and got out, his boots loud on the frozen gravel. The fog had lifted slightly, but the sky remained a solid gray ceiling that promised snow by evening. He circled the vehicle, looking for anything unusual. The doors were locked. Through the frost-glazed windows he could see a day pack on the passenger seat, a thermos in the cup holder, a paperback book splayed open on the dashboard. Normal things, the possessions of someone who expected to come back. "Dispatch Unit 4, I'm at Ash River. Vehicle confirmed, appears undisturbed. I'm going to gear up and head out on the Cruiser Lake Trail. Can you have search and rescue on standby?" "Copy, Unit 4. SAR is notified and standing by. Be advised, Weather Service is calling for snow starting around 1600 hours. Could get 6 to 8 inches overnight." "Understood. I'll check in at the top of every hour. If you don't hear from me by 1400, send the team." "Roger that. Be safe out there." Derek shouldered his pack, emergency supplies, first aid kit, extra water, space blankets, flares, and checked his GPS unit. The Cruiser Lake Loop was an 11-mile trail that wound through some of the most isolated terrain in the park. If Samantha had gotten injured somewhere along that route, she could be anywhere. He tried not to think about what 3 nights of sub-freezing temperatures would do to an immobilized hiker. The trailhead marker stood at the edge of the lot, a wooden post with a carved arrow pointing into the wall of trees. Derek took a breath of cold air, felt it burn in his lungs, and started walking. The first mile was easy, a well-maintained path through mixed birch and pine. The trees spaced far enough apart that pale gray light filtered through to the forest floor. Derek moved at a steady pace, calling out every few hundred yards, "Park Service! Anyone out there? Samantha?" His voice disappeared into the trees without answer. By the second mile, the forest had begun to change. The birches gave way to dense stands of black spruce, their branches heavy with old snow and drooping low enough to brush against his shoulders as he passed. The trail narrowed, becoming less a path and more a suggestion winding between the close-packed trunks. Derek had to push through in places, the branches scraping against his jacket with a sound like whispered warnings. He checked his GPS. On track, 2.3 miles from the trailhead. He should reach Jorgen's Lake within the hour. That was when he noticed the silence. It came suddenly, like stepping through a doorway from one room into another. One moment he could hear the soft crunch of his boots, the distant call of a raven. the whisper of wind in the spruce needles. The next, nothing. Absolute silence. He stopped walking and the silence swallowed even the sound of his own breathing. Derek had experienced this before. The way the forest sometimes went quiet when a predator was near. Wolves did it, so did mountain lions in the western parks where he'd trained. But this felt different. This felt intentional in a way he couldn't explain, as if the silence itself were a living thing pressing close around him. "Hello?" he called, and his voice came out thin, dampened like he was speaking into a pillow. He stood still for nearly a minute, listening. Then from somewhere ahead and to his left he heard a voice. "Help me." It was faint, barely more than a whisper, but unmistakably human, a woman's voice. "Samantha, this is Park Service. Call out if you can hear me." Silence, then, again. "Help me, please. I'm so cold." Derek keyed his radio. "Dispatch, Unit 4. I've got an audible voice contact approximately 2.5 miles in on Cruiser Lake Trail. Female voice, sounds distressed. Moving to investigate." Static answered him. He tried again, checking the frequency, checking the battery. Full charge, correct channel, but when he pressed the transmit button, all he got was static that seemed to whisper just beneath the threshold of comprehension. "Dispatch, do you copy?" Nothing. He turned toward where he'd heard the voice and began pushing through the spruce. The branches clawed at him, leaving thin scratches on his exposed skin, catching at his pack as if trying to hold him back. The gray light dimmed as the canopy thickened overhead. "Keep talking," he shouted. "I'm coming to you." This way. The voice was closer now, but it had changed somehow. The same words, the same feminine tone, but something in the rhythm was wrong. Too even, too measured, like someone reading from a script rather than speaking from desperation. Derek slowed. 6 years in the backcountry had taught him to trust his instincts, and his instincts were screaming at him that something was very, very wrong. "Samantha, if that's you, I need you to tell me something only you would know. What color is your vehicle?" Silence then. "Blue. It's blue. Please hurry. I'm so cold." The information was correct. It was in the dispatch report. Anyone could know that. Derek's hand moved to the bear spray on his belt. He took another step forward, then another. The trees opened suddenly into a small clearing, maybe 30 feet across, carpeted in untouched snow. In the center of the clearing, he saw tracks. They started at the far edge, emerging from the tree line as if something had simply materialized there. Large tracks, far too large to be human, with an elongated, almost skeletal shape. They circled the clearing in a slow spiral, drawing closer and closer to the center with each revolution, before stopping abruptly in the middle. Where they stopped, the snow was disturbed in a wide circle, as if something heavy had crouched there for a long time. Watching. Waiting. Derek's breath caught in his throat. He turned in a slow circle, scanning the tree line. The fog had crept into the clearing while he'd been examining the tracks, reducing visibility to perhaps 20 feet. Beyond that, the trees were gray shadows, motionless, silent. "Help me." The voice came from directly behind him. Derek spun, his hand yanking the bear spray free. There was nothing there, only trees, fog, and the terrible, endless silence. "Where are you?" His own voice sounded wrong now, flat and dead like the voice he'd been following. "Here." The word came from his left. "Here." From his right. "Here." From above somehow, as if something were perched in the branches looking down at him. "I've been here so long, I'm so hungry." Not Samantha's voice anymore. Something older. Something that had never been human. Derek ran. Samantha had stopped running hours ago. Her legs had given out somewhere around the time she'd realized the trail behind her was gone. Not hidden, not obscured, but simply absent, as if it had never existed at all. She'd been walking through trackless forest ever since, moving in what she hoped was south, checking her compass every few minutes even though the needle had started behaving strangely, drifting toward points that didn't exist. She'd heard her father's voice calling her name around midday. She'd almost followed it before she remembered that her father had been dead for 3 years. Now she sat with her back against a massive pine, her legs drawn up to her chest, watching the fog roll between the trees. The temperature had dropped again. She could no longer feel her feet. Her water bottle had frozen solid despite being tucked inside her jacket against her body heat. "I'm going to die out here," she said aloud. And the words were not a lament, but a simple statement of fact. She'd made peace with it somewhere in the last hour, when she'd realized that whatever was hunting her had stopped pretending to be anything other than what it was. She'd seen it twice. The first time, just a glimpse. A shape between the trees that was too tall, too thin, moving with a strange jerking gait like a puppet worked by an amateur. The second time, closer, close enough to see the way its limbs bent at wrong angles. The way its face was almost human but stretched too far in all directions. The way its eyes reflected light that wasn't there. It had smiled at her. A mouth full of teeth that went back too far, that seemed to have no end. "I know you're there," she called into the fog. "I know what you are." The silence pressed closer. Then, from somewhere very near, "Do you? Do you really? Tell me. Tell me what I am." Samantha closed her eyes. Her grandmother had been Ojibwe, had told her stories when she was young about the spirits that lived in the northern woods. Stories meant to frighten children into staying close to camp. Stories that Samantha now understood were never meant to frighten. They were meant to warn. "Wendigo," she whispered. The silence broke into something that might have been laughter, if laughter could freeze the blood in your veins. "Clever girl. So few remember. So few believe." The voice was everywhere now, coming from all directions at once. "But belief doesn't matter. I was here before your people gave me a name. I'll be here long after." Samantha opened her eyes. The fog had cleared from the space directly in front of her, revealing a figure standing perhaps 10 feet away. It wore the shape of a man, or something that had once been a man, impossibly gaunt, impossibly tall, its skin the gray-white of old ice. Its eyes were holes into something deeper than darkness. "I'm not afraid," Samantha lied. The thing smiled, that endless smile. "Yes, you are. I can taste it. I've been tasting it for 3 days. Your fear, your hope, your desperation." It took a step closer, and the movement was wrong, like watching a film skip frames. "I could have taken you the first night, but the fear is sweeter when it ripens. When you understand that no one is coming, that no one will ever find you." Samantha's hand closed around a rock beside her. It was a futile gesture and she knew it, but she would not go without fighting. She would not give it the satisfaction of despair. "Someone will find me," she said. "They'll search. They'll find my camp, my tracks. They will find nothing." The voice was inside her head now, bypassing her ears entirely. "The forest keeps what it is given. The forest forgets, just as it forgot all the others." Another step closer. "Do you want to know how many have walked these woods and never left? How many I have welcomed into the hungry dark?" Samantha screamed. She screamed and threw the rock and lunged to her feet and ran even though her frozen legs buckled beneath her. She made it perhaps 20 feet before something caught her ankle. Something cold, so cold it burned, and dragged her back into the fog. The forest swallowed her scream without echo. Derek burst out of the tree line and found himself back at the clearing. The same clearing. He'd been running for what felt like miles, and he was back at the same clearing with the same spiraling tracks in the same untouched snow. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." His radio crackled. He yanked it from his belt. "Unit 4, status." "Dispatch, dispatch. This is Unit 4. I need immediate extraction. There's something out here. Something. Can't. Breaking up. Repeat. Send help. GPS coordinates." He checked his unit. The screen was flickering, displaying numbers that changed even as he watched. Coordinates for locations that couldn't exist. "Derek." He froze. That wasn't dispatch. That was Samantha's voice coming through his radio. clear as if she were standing beside him. "I found her, Derek. She was so cold. But she's warm now. She's warm and she's not alone anymore. You could be warm too. You could stay with us. Stay forever." Derek threw the radio into the snow. His heart was hammering against his ribs, his breath coming in ragged gasps that burned in the frozen air. The fog had closed in completely now. He couldn't see more than 5 feet in any direction. Think. 6 years of training. 6 years of wilderness survival. There had to be a way out. He pulled his compass from his pocket. The needle spun lazily, aimlessly, pointing nowhere. He looked up at the sky trying to find the sun, but there was only the uniform gray ceiling of clouds. He had no idea which direction he'd come from. No idea which direction led to safety. Tom was right, he said to no one. God help me, Tom was right. The fog shifted. Something moved in his peripheral vision. Tall, impossibly tall, gliding between the trees with that wrong, jerking motion. Derek didn't turn to look at it. He knew somehow that looking at it directly would be the end. Instead, he closed his eyes. He thought about the lake, about the morning fog crawling across the water, about the coffee going cold in his thermos, about his truck waiting in the Ash River lot, the engine that would turn over, the heater that would fill the cab with warmth, the road that would carry him back to the world of light and people and things that made sense. He started walking, eyes closed, one foot in front of the other. The fog pressed against his face like a cold hand, and somewhere behind him he heard that voice. Samantha's voice, his mother's voice, Tom Birchwood's voice, all of them blending into something that was none of them, calling him back. He didn't stop. He didn't look back. He walked for an eternity. He walked until his legs were numb, until his face was raw from cold, until he couldn't feel his hands or his feet or anything except the desperate primal need to keep moving. And then, impossibly, he heard a car engine. Derek opened his eyes. The fog had lifted. He was standing at the edge of the Ash River parking lot, not 5 feet from Samantha's blue Honda. His truck sat beside it, exactly where he'd left it. The sky was darker now. Late afternoon, he realized. He'd been in those woods for over 5 hours. He stumbled to his truck, yanked the door open, climbed inside. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely fit the key into the ignition. The engine turned over on the first try, and the heater roared to life, filling the cab with warmth that felt like salvation. His radio, the truck radio, not the handheld, crackled. Unit 4, this is dispatch. We lost contact with you at 1100 hours. SAR is en route. What's your status? Derek picked up the mic. His voice, when it came, sounded like it belonged to someone else. Dispatch Unit 4. Abort SAR. I'm back at Ash River. He stopped. What could he say? What would they believe? Unit 4? Did you locate the missing hiker? Derek looked out at the forest. The fog was rolling back in, creeping across the parking lot toward his truck. In the tree line, something stood watching. A shape that was almost human. A shape that smiled. Negative dispatch. No sign of her. I recommend we wait for the snow to melt in the spring. Expand the search area. Bring dogs. Bring an army, he thought. It won't matter. Copy that, Unit 4. Return to base. We'll coordinate with County Sheriff. Derek put the truck in gear. As he pulled out of the lot, he looked in his rearview mirror one last time. The shape was gone. But in the snow where it had stood, he could see tracks spiraling outward, patient, endless, waiting for the next one. Samantha Reeves's body was never recovered. The official report listed exposure and disorientation as the probable causes of death, though without remains. The case was technically left open. Her tent was found at the Jorgens Lake campsite 3 weeks later by a winter survey team, still standing, her sleeping bag still inside, her journal open to an entry dated November 17th. The last line read, "Something is circling the camp. I can hear it breathing." Derek Harwell requested a transfer to Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument in Arizona 2 months later. Desert, open sky, no trees, no fog, no places where something old and hungry could hide. The request was approved. On his last night at Voyageurs, Derek stood at the Kabetogama overlook one final time. The lake was frozen solid now, a white expanse stretching toward the Canadian border. Beautiful, deadly, indifferent. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the tree line, he heard a voice calling his name. It sounded almost like Samantha. He didn't answer. He got in his truck and drove south until the sun came up, and he never looked back. But sometimes, in the desert, when the wind dies and the silence stretches too long, he still hears it. That voice. Those voices. All of them calling from the hungry dark, patient as winter, old as ice. Waiting. Location: Voyageurs National Park, Minnesota. Date: November 23, 2019. The coffee had gone cold in Marcus's thermos by the time he noticed. He'd been standing at the window of the Kabetogama Lake Visitor Center for nearly 10 minutes, watching the sky bruise itself purple and gray along the northern horizon. The first real storm of the season was rolling in from Canada, dragging temperatures down into the single digits and promising 8 to 12 inches of snow by morning. He could smell it coming, that particular metallic sharpness that preceded heavy snowfall, mixing with the wood smoke drifting from the center's fireplace. Marcus Chen had worked Voyageurs for 6 winters now, long enough to know the park's moods the way some people knew their spouses' silences. He understood the difference between the creak of ice settling on Rainy Lake and the crack of ice giving way. He could identify a wolf howl from a coyote's at 300 yards, knew which bays froze first, and which stayed treacherous until January. The park sprawled across 18,000 acres of boreal forest, frozen lakes and rocky outcrops. A wilderness that had swallowed better men than him without leaving so much as a ripple. He took a sip of the cold coffee anyway, grimacing at the bitter taste, and checked the large format map pinned to the wall behind the front desk. Red thumbtacks marked the backcountry permits issued for the week. Only 2. The Hendersons, a retired couple from Duluth, had checked in yesterday from their campsite on Locator Lake. All fine, heading home tomorrow. The second permit belonged to a solo hiker, a 28-year-old woman from Minneapolis named Allison Reeves, who had signed out for a 3-day trip along the Cruiser Lake Trail system. Her return date was today. Check-in time had been noon. Marcus glanced at the clock above the door. 2:47 p.m. The storm was supposed to hit around 6. He keyed his radio. Dispatch, this is Kabetogama Station, checking status on backcountry permit 1147, Reeves Allison. She's nearly 3 hours overdue for return. Weather moving in fast, over. Static crackled, then Janet's voice came through, steady as always. Copy, Kabetogama. We show no contact from permit 1147 since initial departure November 21st. Last planned campsite was Anderson Bay. Do you want us to ping her emergency beacon? Over. Affirmative. Let's get a location before this storm locks everything down. Over. Stand by. Marcus pulled on his parka while he waited, muscle memory guiding his hands through the familiar ritual. Check flashlight batteries. Verify GPS charge. Confirm satellite phone was in the left chest pocket. His snowshoes hung by the door, already fitted with fresh bindings he'd replaced last week. Outside, the first snowflakes were beginning to fall, sparse and exploratory. Scouts for the army gathering in those purple clouds. The radio crackled again. Kabetogama, dispatch. Beacon ping on permit 1147 shows position approximately 2 miles northeast of Locator Lake, bearing 047. That's... Marcus, that's off trail. Significantly off trail. In the restricted watershed area. Over. Marcus felt the first cold finger of unease trace down his spine. The restricted watershed was closed for ecological recovery. No trails, no campsites, no reason for any hiker to be there. Allison Reeves had been given maps clearly marking the boundaries. Her permit had been issued for Cruiser Lake, almost 4 miles southwest of where her beacon now pulsed. Copy, dispatch. I'm heading out for recovery. Alert County SAR for possible assist, but I want to get eyes on her position before the storm hits. Over. Understood. Be careful out there. Weather Service just upgraded the warning. We're looking at blizzard conditions by 1900. Over. Acknowledged. Kabetagama out. He was out the door before Janet finished signing off. The forest swallowed sound differently in late November. The deciduous trees had surrendered their leaves weeks ago, leaving skeletal birches and aspens standing like pale bones among the dark spires of spruce and pine. Marcus moved through this landscape with practiced efficiency, his snowshoes whispering against the thin crust of old snow that would soon be buried under fresh accumulation. The temperature had dropped noticeably in the 20 minutes since he'd left the station. He estimated mid-teens now, heading lower. He followed the GPS bearing toward Allison's beacon, leaving the maintained trail after the first mile and pushing into the unmarked wilderness beyond. The restricted watershed had been closed for 15 years, long enough for the forest to reclaim the old logging roads that once crisscrossed this section of the park. Without those roads, the terrain became a maze of frozen beaver ponds, rocky ridges, and thick stands of conifers that blocked the fading daylight. By 4:15, the snow was falling steadily, fat flakes that stuck to his eyelashes and accumulated on his shoulders. Marcus paused to check his GPS, half a mile to the beacon position, and realized with a start that the forest had gone completely silent. No wind, no birds, no distant crack of branches under snow weight. Nothing. He stood motionless, straining to hear anything beyond his own breathing and the soft percussion of snowflakes landing on his hood. The silence felt wrong somehow. Aggressive. Like the forest was holding its breath. "Allison Reeves," he called out, his voice sounding obscenely loud in the vacuum. "National Park Service, can you hear me?" The silence swallowed his words without echo. Marcus continued forward, one hand resting on the bear spray at his belt. Not that it would do much good in this cold, but the weight was familiar, comforting. The GPS showed 400 yards now, then 300. The beacon signal strong and steady. She should be close enough to hear him calling. He found her pack first. It was leaning against a spruce tree, carefully positioned as if she'd set it down for a rest and simply never picked it back up. The main compartment was still zipped, the rain fly neatly secured. Marcus crouched beside it and found a water bottle frozen solid in the side pocket, a granola bar wrapper, a paperback book. Wild, by Cheryl Strayed, with a receipt from a Minneapolis bookstore marking her place roughly halfway through. "Allison!" His voice cracked against the silence. "Allison Reeves, can you hear me?" He pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, Kabetogama. I've located the subject's pack at beacon position. No visual on subject. Pack appears deliberately placed. No signs of struggle. Continuing search of immediate area. Over." Janet's response came through layered with static, the storm already interfering with communications. "Copy. Marcus. Careful. Conditions deteriorating. Backup. 30 minutes. Repeat. Dispatch. You're breaking up. Over. 30. En route. Careful." Then nothing but the hiss of empty air. 6 hours earlier, Allison Reeves had woken to a sound she couldn't identify. The inside of her tent was warm from her body heat, a small cocoon of safety against the November cold. She lay still in her sleeping bag, listening. The sound came again. A voice, she thought. Distant and indistinct, calling something that might have been a name. Her name? She unzipped the tent fly just enough to peer out. Dawn was breaking gray and reluctant over Anderson Bay, the lake surface a sheet of steel-colored ice that she knew wasn't thick enough to walk on yet. The forest stood silent at the water's edge, dark evergreens dusted with frost. "Hello?" she called. The voice came again, clearer now but still too far away to make out words. It seemed to be coming from the north, deeper into the forest. Someone in trouble, maybe. Another hiker who'd gotten lost, calling for help. Allison dressed quickly, pulling on her insulated layers with the efficiency of someone who'd spent plenty of time in the backcountry. She was a careful hiker, methodical. She'd been coming to Minnesota's North Woods since college, knew the dangers of solo travel, always filed her permits and stuck to her planned routes. But someone might need help. She left her pack at the campsite, Stupid, she'd think later if there was a later, and followed the voice into the trees. The voice stayed ahead of her, always just far enough that she couldn't quite see who was calling. Sometimes it sounded like a woman, sometimes like a man, sometimes like something trying very hard to sound like both. She walked for 10 minutes, then 20, the forest growing thicker around her, the spaces between trees narrowing until she had to turn sideways to pass through. Hello? Where are you? Are you hurt? Allison. The voice was closer now, just beyond the next stand of spruces. Allison, help me. I'm so cold. She pushed through the branches and then stopped. There was nothing there. Just a small clearing, perfectly circular, the snow unmarked by any footprints except her own trailing behind her. The trees surrounding the clearing stood impossibly close together, their branches interwoven like fingers lacing shut. Allison turned around. The path she'd taken was gone. Where she'd pushed through moments ago, there was only a wall of evergreen branches, thick and impenetrable, as if the forest had grown closed behind her. No, she whispered. No, no, no. She ran at the trees, trying to force her way through, but the branches grabbed at her jacket, her hair, scratching her face and hands. She changed direction, tried another gap. Same result. The clearing had become a cage, and then she heard it. Not from outside the clearing, not from among the trees, from directly behind her. Breathing. Slow and deep and wrong, like something trying to remember what breathing sounded like. Allison didn't turn around. She couldn't. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her body had locked up, frozen not from cold but from a terror so primal it predated language, predated thought, predated everything except the animal knowledge that she was prey and the predator was close enough to touch. Allison. The voice came from right beside her ear now, intimate as a lover's whisper. But it wasn't a voice anymore. It was voices, dozens of them layered over each other, men and women and children, all speaking her name in perfect unison. I'm so cold, Allison. Won't you help me get warm? She felt something brush against her shoulder. Something that might have been a hand, if hands had too many fingers and bent in too many directions. Allison screamed. Marcus found the clearing at 5:23 p.m. The snow was falling heavily now, visibility down to 30 yards and dropping. His flashlight beam cut through the white curtain, illuminating a circle of spruce trees that seemed too perfectly arranged, too deliberately spaced. In the center of the clearing, the snow was disturbed, footprints that circled and circled and circled, going nowhere, a spiral of panic frozen into the accumulation. And in the exact center of that spiral, a single glove. Purple, synthetic, the kind you'd buy at REI for $30. Marcus picked it up, still slightly warm. Allison, his voice echoed strangely in the clearing, bouncing back at him from directions that didn't make sense. He spun, flashlight sweeping the tree line, seeing nothing but snow and shadow and the dark spaces between branches where anything could be hiding. The radio crackled. Marcus grabbed for it. Arcus. The voice was Janet's, but stretched, distorted, like a recording played at the wrong speed. Arcus, can you hear me? Janet, I found evidence of the subject. Signs of distress. I need that backup now. Do you copy? Over. Static. Then a voice that was not Janet's. Marcus. Clear as a bell, no static at all. Marcus, I found her. She's hurt. Come quick. He knew that voice. Frank Duchamp, his supervisor at the Rainy Lake Station, but Frank was in Duluth this week at a training conference. Frank was 200 miles away. Who is this? Marcus whispered into the radio. Identify yourself. Marcus, please. The voice was pleading now, desperate. She's dying. You have to hurry. Follow the trail north. I'll guide you in. The voice knew his name. Knew Allison was a woman. Knew which direction was north. Marcus thought about the old stories Janet had told him, back when he first transferred to Voyageurs, the warnings the Ojibwe elders still gave to anyone who would listen about traveling alone in the deep woods during winter. About the spirits of hunger that lived in the cold places, the ones who had once been human but had become something else, something that fed on isolation and despair, about how they learned voices, how they used them. "No," Marcus said. He was walking backward now, toward the edge of the clearing, toward the path he'd broken through the snow. "No, I don't think I will. Marcus." The voice changed, cycled through registers. Frank's bass, then Janet's alto, then a woman's voice he didn't recognize, then a child's, then something that wasn't a voice at all, just a sound like wind through hollow bones. "Marcus, don't leave. Marcus, I'm so cold. Marcus, I'm so hungry. Marcus, Marcus, Marcus." He ran. Behind him, the forest erupted with sound. Branches cracking, snow crunching, something massive moving through the trees faster than anything that size should be able to move. Marcus didn't look back. He couldn't look back. He knew with absolute certainty that if he looked back, if he saw what was chasing him, he would stop. He would stand frozen like Allison must have stood, like all the others before her must have stood, and he would never move again. The radio in his hand screamed with voices, dozens of them, hundreds, all calling his name in overlapping chorus, a choir of the taken singing him toward his death. He burst out of the restricted watershed onto the marked trail, his lungs burning, his legs threatening to give out. The storm had reached full fury now, wind driving snow horizontally into his face, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. He ran until he saw the lights of the visitor center through the white curtain, ran until he crashed through the front door and slammed it behind him, ran until he collapsed against the wall and sat there shaking for what might have been minutes or might have been hours. The radio had gone silent. Outside, the storm howled, and somewhere in that howling, if he listened closely, which he tried very hard not to do, he could almost hear voices calling his name. They found Allison Reeves's pack the next morning, after the storm cleared. They found her footprints leading into the restricted watershed, a trail that circled and wandered, and eventually simply stopped in a clearing that search teams would later describe as unusual and disorienting in their reports. They never found Allison. The official report listed her as missing, presumed deceased, cause undetermined. The Park Service sent grief counselors to speak with her family in Minneapolis. A small memorial was placed at the Cruiser Lake trailhead, where she should have been hiking, where she would have been safe. Marcus transferred to Joshua Tree National Park 3 months later. Desert, rock, sun, no forests, no lakes, no frozen silences where things could hide and wait and call with voices that didn't belong to them. He still wakes sometimes in the small hours of the morning, certain he's heard someone calling his name from just outside his window. He tells himself it's the wind. It's always just the wind. But he never answers. He never opens the window to look. And he has never in all the years since gone back to Minnesota. Some places, once you've heard them calling, never stop. Location: Gates of the Arctic National Park, Alaska. Date: February 19th, 2017. The Cessna 185 banked hard over the Brooks Range, and Brandon Holt watched the world below transform into something that didn't belong on any map he'd ever studied. Ridgelines of black rock jutted through endless white like the spine of something buried and half forgotten. No roads, no trails, no evidence that human beings had ever set foot in this landscape, except for the faint scar of a frozen riverbed that their pilot, a leathery Inupiat man named Solomon, was using for navigation. Gates of the Arctic in February wasn't a national park. It was a void with a name, 250,000 acres of nothing pretending to be somewhere. 30 minutes to the coordinates, Solomon said over the headset, his voice flat. He hadn't spoken since takeoff in Bettles, and Brandon got the sense that wasn't unusual for him. The old man flew with his jaw clenched, eyes fixed forward, hands steady on the yoke, like he was trying not to look at something. Austin Mercer sat in the back, checking their gear for the 3rd time. Satellite phone, charged. Spot beacon, verified. 2 weeks of emergency rations. Medical kit with frostbite protocols. Body bag, folded tight at the bottom of the pack. Standard SR loadout for a recovery operation. Because after 94 days in the Alaskan interior with no supplies, no shelter, and temperatures that had dropped to -47, this wasn't a rescue anymore. Dr. Julian Cross, glaciologist, University of Alaska Fairbanks, was dead. They were just bringing back what was left. Except 3 days ago, a wildlife survey flight had spotted something impossible. A figure walking across the Alatna River Valley, waving at the plane. No tent. No camp. No tracks leading to or from the location. The pilot had radioed coordinates and circled twice before fuel concerns forced him back to Bettles. By the time a follow-up flight reached the area, the figure was gone. But the GPS beacon Julian had carried, silent for 3 months, had suddenly started transmitting from a position 6 miles east of the original sighting. The beacon was still transmitting. It hadn't moved in 72 hours. Brandon had led search and rescue operations in Alaska for 11 years. He'd pulled survivors from avalanches, plane crashes, river drownings. He'd recovered bodies frozen so solid they had to be chipped out of the ice with axes. He thought he understood what the wilderness could do to a person, how it could break them down and scatter the pieces across miles of indifferent terrain. He didn't understand how a man could survive 94 days in gates of the Arctic with nothing. "You ever work a job out here before?" Austin asked, leaning forward between the seats. Brandon shook his head. Denali twice. Wrangell once. Never this far north. "I did a recovery in the Noatak drainage 4 years ago," Austin said. His voice was steady, professional, but Brandon had worked with him long enough to hear the edge beneath it. Hiker went missing in September, found him in November, sitting upright against a rock, frozen solid, eyes open, smiling. Exposure does strange things. "Yeah." Austin paused. Except he was facing away from his camp, walking deeper into the wilderness when he died, and there were tracks around him, barefoot, in the snow. Brandon didn't respond. Outside the window, the Brooks Range stretched toward the horizon like a wall at the end of the world. Solomon's voice crackled through the headset. "Landing in 5. I'm not staying." "We need extraction in 48 hours, Brandon said. That was the arrangement. "I'll be back in 48 hours, but I'm not staying now, not here." The old man's hands tightened on the yoke. "You find what you're looking for. You get on the radio. You get out. You don't wait. You don't look around. You don't follow anything that calls your name, understand?" Brandon exchanged a glance with Austin. The younger ranger's face was carefully neutral. "Understood," Brandon said. The plane descended toward the frozen riverbed, and the sky above them flickered with pale green light. Aurora borealis, dancing against the perpetual twilight. Beautiful. But as they dropped lower, Brandon noticed something wrong. The lights were moving east to west. The wind was blowing west to east. Solomon saw it too. His jaw tightened further, and he didn't say another word until the skis touched ice. They found the beacon at 14:37 hours, exactly where the GPS said it would be. A small orange device sitting on top of a flat rock, positioned carefully, deliberately, like an offering on an altar. No tracks around it. No indication of how it had gotten there. The snow was pristine in every direction, unmarked by human passage, undisturbed by wind. Austin approached first while Brandon hung back, scanning the perimeter. The valley stretched around them in a bowl of white and gray, the mountains rising on 3 sides like the walls of an amphitheater. The silence was absolute. No wind, no birds, no distant aircraft. Just the sound of their own breathing and the crunch of snow beneath their boots. And even those sounds seemed muted, swallowed by something in the air that Brandon couldn't name. "Beacon's intact," Austin called out. "Batteries at 12%. It shouldn't have lasted this long. These units are rated for 30 days max in extreme cold." "I know." Austin picked up the device, turned it over. "Brandon, there's something carved into the rock." Brandon approached. The flat stone beneath where the beacon had rested bore scratches. Symbols, maybe, or letters. He couldn't tell. They looked almost like writing, but the shapes were wrong. The angles too precise for human hands numbed by cold. Too alien for any alphabet he recognized. "Could be Inupiaq," Austin said, but he didn't sound convinced. Solomon might know. Solomon's not here. Austin pocketed the beacon. Let's keep moving. The last known position was northwest, half a mile. They hiked in silence, following their GPS toward the coordinates where the survey pilot had first spotted the figure. The twilight deepened around them, the sun a pale smear on the southern horizon that provided light but no warmth. Brandon's thermometer read -23 Fahrenheit. Cold but manageable. He'd worked in worse. What bothered him was the snow. It should have shown tracks, animal tracks at minimum. This was caribou territory, wolf territory, wolverine and fox and ptarmigan. But the white expanse around them was unmarked, untouched, like a page that had never been written on. Like nothing living had passed through here in a very long time. Brandon. Austin had stopped ahead, his voice strange. I see him. Brandon looked up. At the base of a low ridge, perhaps 200 yards distant, a figure stood motionless in the snow. Human, upright, facing them, not moving, not waving, just standing. Brandon raised his binoculars. The figure resolved into a man, thin, bearded, wearing what looked like the tatters of a red parka. Dr. Julian Cross. It had to be. He matched the photos in the file, but something was wrong with the way he stood. The angle of his limbs, the tilt of his head, like a puppet held up by strings that weren't quite attached in the right places. Julian Cross, Brandon shouted, his voice swallowed by the emptiness. National Park Service, we're here to help you. The figure didn't respond, didn't move. Austin started forward and Brandon grabbed his arm. Wait, he could be hypothermic, disoriented. We need to... Look at the snow around him. Austin looked. The snow around Julian's feet was pristine. No tracks leading to where he stood. No tracks leading away. He was simply there, planted in the middle of an unmarked field of white, like he had materialized from nothing. That's not possible, Austin said. I know. They approached slowly, weapons at their sides, not drawn, not yet, but ready. With each step, Brandon expected Julian to move, to speak, to collapse, to do something human. He didn't. He stood with that terrible stillness, that wrongness of posture, and watched them come with eyes that caught the twilight and reflected it back like mirrors. 50 yards, 20, 10. Brandon stopped. He could see Julian's face clearly now. The cracked lips, the frostbitten nose, the beard crusted with ice. He could see the red parka, torn and stained, insufficient for these temperatures. He could see the man's hands, bare and blackened with what should have been terminal frostbite. And he could see the eyes. Julian Cross's eyes were open. They were focused. They tracked Brandon's movements with perfect precision. But there was nothing behind them. No recognition. No fear. No humanity. Just a vast and patient emptiness, like looking into a window that opened onto a room with no walls. Dr. Cross, Brandon said carefully. Julian, can you hear me? The man's mouth opened, closed, opened again. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse, unused, like machinery grinding back to life after decades of silence. I came back, he said. Yes, you did. We're going to take you home now. I came back, Julian repeated, but I left something there. I left... He stopped, his head tilted further a full 45 degrees, an angle that should have been impossible without breaking the neck. I don't remember what I left. It was important. I was someone, and then I was somewhere else, and now I'm here, but I'm not all here. Parts of me are still there. Do you understand? Do you understand what that means? We're going to get you medical attention. Everything's going to be fine. No. Julian's voice changed, dropped, became something else. Something that resonated in Brandon's chest like a bass note. Something that made his teeth ache. You shouldn't have come. They let me go, but they're still watching. They're always watching. They wanted to see if anyone would come looking, and you did. You came, and now they know. His eyes shifted, focused on something behind Brandon. Austin screamed. Brandon spun, hand going to his sidearm, and saw nothing. Empty snow, empty twilight, the mountains in the distance impassive and eternal. But Austin was backing away, his face white, his breath coming in ragged gasps. There was someone there, right there, standing in the snow. Tall, so tall, and it had my face, Brandon. It was wearing my face and it was smiling. There's nothing there. I saw it. I saw it. Brandon grabbed Austin's arm, turned back toward Julian. Julian was gone. The snow where he had stood was unmarked. No footprints. No impression. As if he had never been there at all. As if they had been talking to empty air. "We need to go," Brandon said. His voice was calm, but his hands were shaking. "Now. We need to go now." They ran. They ran toward the extraction point, toward the frozen riverbed where Solomon would return in 46 hours, toward anything that resembled safety in this void that wore a landscape as a mask. Behind them, the aurora flickered and writhed, moving against the wind, and somewhere in the growing darkness, Brandon heard a voice call his name. It sounded like Austin's voice. Austin was running beside him, mouth clamped shut, not speaking. The voice called again, closer now, patient and curious. "Brandon, I see what you left behind." They didn't stop. They didn't look back. They reached the extraction point as full darkness fell. That absolute darkness of the Arctic winter, deeper than anything Brandon had experienced in 11 years of Alaskan rescue work. They set up the emergency shelter with numb hands, working by headlamp, not speaking. Austin's eyes kept drifting to the perimeter, searching the darkness for something he wouldn't name. At 2200 hours, they heard footsteps outside the tent. Slow, deliberate, circling. Brandon killed his headlamp, motioned for Austin to do the same. In the darkness, he could hear his partner's breathing, fast, shallow, terrified. The footsteps stopped directly outside the tent wall. Silence. Then a voice, Julian's voice, but wrong, layered with something else, something that echoed from too many directions at once. "I remember now. I remember what I left behind." Brandon didn't respond, didn't breathe. "I left my name. They took my name and gave me something else, something that doesn't fit right, and now I don't know what I am anymore." Do you know what that's like? To forget what you're called? To forget you were ever called anything at all? The tent wall bowed inward, pressed by something on the other side. Brandon could see the impression of a hand, too long, too many fingers, pressing against the fabric like a child pressing against a window. "I want to remember," Julian's voice whispered. "Give me your name. Let me try it on. I'll give it back. I promise. I promise. I'll give it back." Austin whimpered. Brandon clamped a hand over his mouth. The pressure on the tent wall relaxed. The footsteps resumed, circling, patient and eternal. They continued for 3 hours. Brandon counted. At 0100, they stopped. At 0300, the aurora returned, pale and sickly, moving in directions that defied the wind. At 0600, the gray twilight crept back, and Brandon opened the tent flap to find Julian Cross sitting in the snow 50 feet away, facing the sunrise that would never come. He wasn't moving, he wasn't breathing. His skin had the blue-white pallor of death, and frost had sealed his eyes shut. But when Brandon approached, Julian's mouth opened one last time. "Tell them," he whispered through frozen lips. "Tell them I tried to come back. I tried so hard. But they don't let you leave. Not really. Not all of you." He exhaled a breath that hung in the air like smoke, like a question, like a prayer. Then he was still. Solomon arrived at 1430 hours, 48 hours to the minute. He took one look at the body bag, one look at Brandon and Austin's faces, and didn't ask any questions. The flight back to Bettles took 2 hours. Brandon watched the Brooks Range recede through the window, watched the gates of the Arctic shrink to a white smear on the horizon, and felt something watching back. Patient, curious, hungry for names it could try on and never give back. The official report listed Julian Cross as deceased, cause of death, exposure. His body was shipped to Fairbanks for autopsy. The medical examiner found no anomalies, just a man who had frozen to death in the wilderness. Another cautionary tale about the dangers of solo fieldwork in extreme conditions. But the report didn't mention what was carved into Julian's chest, beneath the tattered parka, scratched into the skin with something sharp. Symbols that looked almost like writing. An alphabet no linguist could identify. The report didn't mention that Julian's dental records didn't match, that his fingerprints were close but not exact, that the DNA results came back inconclusive, as if his genetic material had been scrambled and reassembled by hands that didn't quite understand how it was supposed to fit together. The report didn't mention that Austin Mercer resigned from the Park Service 3 weeks later, or that he was last seen boarding a flight to Bettles with a full pack and a one-way ticket. When Brandon tried to call him, a voice answered. Austin's voice, but wrong, the pauses in the wrong places, the inflections subtly alien. "I went back," the voice said. "I had to see. I had to know what I left behind. Austin, where are you?" "I found it, Brandon. I found what I was looking for. It was me. I left me behind, and now I'm whole again. Now, I'm finally whole." The line went dead. Austin Mercer's body was never found. His beacon never transmitted. His file remains open, listed as missing, presumed dead. But sometimes in the long darkness of the Arctic winter, Wildlife Survey pilots report seeing a figure walking across the tundra in gates of the Arctic, waving at planes, smiling. They say he looks familiar. They say he looks like someone they used to know. They say he's still searching for something. A name, maybe. A name he can try on. A name someone might be willing to give him if he just asks politely enough. If you ever hear someone call your name in the wilderness in a voice you recognize but can't quite place, don't answer. Don't turn around. And whatever you do, don't tell them what you're called. Some things, once given, can never be taken back. Date: August 27, 2017. In the rain had been falling for 36 hours without pause. Kyle Brennan stood at the window of the Barataria Preserve Ranger Station, watching the parking lot transform into a shallow lake. The water was the color of coffee with too much cream, carrying leaves and Spanish moss and debris from deeper in the swamp. According to the Weather Service, Tropical Storm Elise had stalled 60 miles offshore, her rotation grinding against the Louisiana coast like a mill wheel, dumping inches of rain every hour with no sign of moving on. It was Kyle's 6th day as a park ranger, his first week alone. The station was a modest building, single-story, cinder-block construction, built to withstand exactly this kind of weather. Hurricane shutters covered most of the windows, but Kyle had left one unshuttered so he could monitor conditions. The preserve stretched out beyond the parking lot in all directions. 26,000 acres of bayou, hardwood forest, and cypress swamp that formed the buffer between New Orleans and the Gulf of Mexico. On clear days, you could walk the boardwalk trails and see alligators sunning themselves on mud banks, herons stalking through the shallows, the occasional cottonmouth draped over a low branch. Today, you couldn't see past the curtain of rain. Kyle checked his watch. 2:15 p.m., though the sky was dark enough to pass for dusk. He'd completed his morning rounds of the station perimeter, verified that all the flood barriers were holding, and logged 3 calls with dispatch in Marrero. Communications were getting spotty as the storm intensified. His supervisor, Ranger Thibodeau, had evacuated 2 days ago, along with the rest of the staff, heading to higher ground in Baton Rouge. Kyle had volunteered to stay behind for the skeleton crew rotation, eager to prove himself useful. Now, alone in a building surrounded by rising water, he was beginning to question that decision. The radio on his belt crackled. "Barataria Station, this is Marrero Dispatch. Do you copy? Over." Kyle grabbed it. "Dispatch Barataria, I copy, go ahead, over." "Kyle, we've got a situation." The dispatcher's voice, Maria, he thought her name was, carried an edge he hadn't heard before. Got a 911 relay from Jefferson Parish. Caller reported a vehicle abandoned at the Kenta Canal trailhead about 90 minutes ago. White Honda Civic, Louisiana plates. Caller was driving past, saw a woman standing at the edge of the water, then lost sight of her when the rain picked up. Over. Kyle felt his stomach tighten. The Kenta Canal trailhead was 3 miles into the preserve, accessible only by a single road that was almost certainly flooded by now. Dispatch, conditions here are deteriorating. Water's up at least 2 feet since this morning. That road might not be passable. Over. Understood, but we can't get anyone else out there. Parish Sheriff is dealing with evacuations on the north side. Coast Guard's tied up with a capsized shrimper near Grand Isle. You're it, Kyle. We need you to check if that vehicle's still there and if there's any sign of the woman. Do not proceed into the swamp. Observe and report only. Copy? Over. Kyle looked out the window at the rain, at the water creeping across the parking lot, at the gray wall of storm that had swallowed the world. Copy, dispatch, I'm heading out now. Will report when I reach the trailhead. Over. Be careful out there. Storm's supposed to get worse before it gets better. Dispatch out. Kyle pulled on his rain gear. Waterproof jacket, waders, the wide-brimmed hat that did almost nothing to keep water out of his eyes. He grabbed his flashlight, his radio, and after a moment's hesitation, the shotgun from the emergency cabinet. Alligators got aggressive when floodwaters pushed them out of their territory. He told himself that was why he was bringing it. He didn't let himself think about the other reason. Samantha Ortiz had made a mistake, and she knew it. She'd driven out to Barataria that morning against every piece of advice she'd received. Her grandmother was dying, had been dying for 3 weeks now, fading away in a hospice bed in Marrero. And before she went, she'd asked Samantha for one thing: a photograph. There was a photograph somewhere in the old fishing cabin on Bayou des Familles, a picture of her grandfather standing in front of the cabin the year they'd built it, 1952. Grandma Lucille wanted to hold it one more time before she passed. The cabin had been abandoned for 20 years, ever since Grandpa Henry died. The family had always meant to clean it out, but somehow never had. Now Grandma was asking, and the storm was coming, and if Samantha waited for the weather to clear, it might be too late. So she'd driven through the rain, parked at the Kenta Canal trailhead, and started walking. That was 2 hours ago. The trail had disappeared within the first quarter mile, swallowed by brown water that came up to her knees, then her thighs. She'd pressed on anyway, using her phone's GPS to navigate toward the cabin's coordinates. The phone had died an hour ago. Water damage probably, or maybe just the battery giving out. Now she was somewhere in the swamp with no trail, no phone, and no idea which direction led back to her car. The water was still rising. Samantha found a cypress knee, one of those strange root protrusions that jutted up from the swamp floor, and clung to it, trying to catch her breath. The rain hammered down on her head, so heavy it felt like being struck. Through the downpour, she could barely see 10 feet in any direction. Gray water, gray sky, gray curtains of moss hanging from branches that emerged from the flood like skeletal arms. "Help!" she screamed. "Somebody help me!" Her voice died in the rain. Nobody answered. She started moving again, pushing through water that fought her with every step. The bottom was treacherous. Soft mud that sucked at her feet, submerged roots that snagged her ankles, sudden drop-offs where the ground simply vanished. She fell twice, went under once, came up choking on water that tasted of rotting vegetation and something else, something metallic that she didn't want to identify. And then she heard it. A splash, somewhere behind her, too heavy to be rain, too deliberate to be debris. Samantha froze, turning slowly in the waist-deep water. Through the sheets of rain, she saw nothing. Just swamp, just storm. But she heard it again, closer now. A wet, rhythmic sound, like something large moving through the water with terrible patience. "Hello?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Is someone there?" The splashing stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound had been. Samantha became aware of her own heartbeat, thundering in her ears. And beneath that, beneath the rain and the wind and her own ragged breathing, she heard something else. Breathing. deep and slow and wrong, like something pretending to breathe, imitating the action without understanding the need. She ran. Kyle reached the Kenta Canal trailhead at 3:47 p.m. after 40 minutes of driving through water that had risen to his truck's wheel wells. The white Honda Civic was right where dispatch had said it would be, parked at the edge of the flooded lot, driver's door hanging open, interior lights still glowing weakly against the storm-dark afternoon. He pulled up beside it and killed his engine. Through the rain-streaked windows, he could see the car was empty. A purse sat on the passenger seat, contents spilled across the upholstery. On the dashboard, a photograph in a wooden frame, an old man standing in front of a cabin smiling at the camera. Dispatch Barataria. Kyle had to shout to be heard over the storm. I've reached the Kenta Canal location. Vehicle confirmed. White Honda Civic. No sign of the owner. Driver's door open. Personal effects inside. It looks like she went into the preserve. Over. Static. Then Maria's voice, broken and distant. Copy. Do not repeat. Not pursue. Water. Dispatch, you're breaking up. Say again. Over. Dangerous. Return to conditions. Dispatch. Maria, do you copy? Nothing but static. Kyle sat in his truck, watching the rain batter the abandoned Civic. The woman had walked into the swamp at least 2 hours ago, probably more. In this weather, in these conditions, alone and almost certainly unprepared, the math wasn't good. Every minute he waited was a minute she was getting further from safety, deeper into water that was rising by the hour. He thought about his training. Observe and report. Do not proceed into the swamp. He thought about the photograph on her dashboard. Someone's grandfather. Someone waiting for that picture. He thought about how it would feel to drive back to the station, write up a report, and wait for the recovery team to find her body in 3 days when the water receded. Damn it. Kyle grabbed his shotgun, his flashlight, and his radio. He sealed the truck as best he could, marked the coordinates on his GPS, and stepped out into the storm. The water came up to his knees immediately. The trail, what had been a trail, was completely submerged, distinguishable only by the slight gap in the cypress trees on either side. Kyle waded forward, using his flashlight to probe the murky water ahead, calling out every few steps. Hello, Park Service, can you hear me? The swamp answered with rain and silence. He pushed deeper. The water rose to his thighs, then his waist. The trees closed in around him, their branches heavy with Spanish moss that dragged across his face like wet fingers. The light was failing fast, the afternoon storm dark deepening toward something that might have been evening, or might have been the end of the world. Kyle had been walking for perhaps 20 minutes when he found the first sign, a shoe. A woman's sneaker, white with pink laces floating in the brown water caught against a submerged root. He grabbed it, turned it over. Size 7 maybe, relatively new, recently lost. Hello? His voice cracked. Park Service, I found your shoe. Can you hear me? Something moved in the water ahead of him. Kyle froze, bringing his flashlight up. The beam cut through the rain, illuminating nothing but cypress trunks and hanging moss, and the endless brown surface of the flood. But he'd seen it. A ripple, a wake. Something large displacing water as it moved. Alligator. Had to be an alligator. He raised the shotgun, holding it one-handed while he kept the flashlight steady. Hey, get out of here! He splashed the water with his foot, the standard technique for scaring off curious gators. The ripple had stopped. Whatever had made it was gone, or waiting. Kyle's radio crackled. He grabbed for it with relief. Dispatch, this is Barataria. I found evidence of the missing woman approximately half a mile into the preserve. I'm continuing the search. Over. The voice that came back wasn't Maria's. Kyle. Low, rasping, like someone speaking through a throat full of gravel. Kyle, I found her. She's hurt. Come quick. Kyle's blood went cold. Who is this? Identify yourself. Over. Kyle. The voice changed, shifted, became something that was almost feminine, but not quite. Almost human, but not quite. Help me. I'm so lost. Help me, Kyle. Follow my voice." He turned off the radio. For a long moment he stood motionless in the waist-deep water, rain hammering his shoulders, flashlight beam trembling in his grip. His grandmother had been Cajun, born and raised in Houma, full of stories about the swamp and the things that lived in it. Stories he'd dismissed as superstition, old wives' tales meant to keep children from wandering too far from home. Stories about the Rougarou. "It knows your name," his grandmother had told him once, her eyes serious in a way that had frightened him even as a child. "Once it knows your name, it can call you. And once it calls you, you gotta be strong, Cher. You gotta be stronger than the wanting to answer." Something howled in the swamp ahead of him. Not a gator. He knew what gators sounded like. This was higher, longer, a sound that rose and fell and rose again, carrying through the storm with impossible clarity. Kyle did something he'd never done before on the job. He started walking backward. Samantha had stopped running when her legs gave out. She clung to a cypress trunk, chin barely above water, sobbing with exhaustion and terror. The thing had chased her for what felt like hours, never quite catching up, always just behind her, herding her deeper and deeper into the swamp. She understood now, with the clarity of someone who has accepted their death, that it was playing with her, driving her towards something, someplace it wanted her to be. The rain had faded to a steady downpour, and in the growing darkness, Samantha could see further than she had all day. The swamp stretched out around her in every direction, featureless and vast. No landmarks, no trails, no hope. And then she saw the cabin. It emerged from the gloom like a ghost, a small wooden structure on stilts, listing slightly to one side, its porch just inches above the floodwater. The roof was intact, the door was closed. After hours of nothing but water and trees and terror, it looked like salvation. Samantha pushed toward it, using the last of her strength to wade through the chest-deep water. She reached the porch steps, pulled herself up, collapsed on the warped wooden boards. For a long moment she just lay there, gasping, crying, shaking with cold and fear. Then she looked up at the door. A symbol had been carved into the wood. Crude, old, weathered by decades of storms, but still visible. A circle with lines radiating outward like a sun or a wheel, and beneath it, words in French that she couldn't read. Samantha crawled to the door and pushed it open. The interior was dark, but dry. Dusty furniture, a cold fireplace, shelves lined with jars and bottles. She pulled herself inside, shut the door behind her, and leaned against it, sobbing with relief. It was only then that she noticed the photographs on the wall. Dozens of them in frames of all sizes, faces staring out at her from decades past. Men in fishing gear, women in cotton dresses, children playing in the shallows. And there, in the center of the wall, larger than the rest, an old man standing in front of this very cabin, 1952, her grandfather's cabin. She'd found it. Samantha laughed, a broken sound that was half sob. She'd made it. Against all odds, she'd found what she came for. Now she just had to survive until morning, until the storm passed, until someone came looking. Outside, something scratched at the door. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." The scratching stopped. Then softly, almost gently, "Samantha." The voice was her grandmother's. Perfect, exactly as she remembered it, warm and loving and impossible. "Samantha Cher, open the door. I came to find you. Open the door and let me in." Samantha pressed her back against the door and screamed. Kyle heard the scream. It cut through the storm like a knife, high and desperate and unmistakably human. He'd been retreating toward the trailhead, fighting the rising water, trying to convince himself that survival was more important than heroism. But that scream changed everything. Damn it. God damn it. He turned and pushed deeper into the swamp. The water was chest deep now, forcing him to hold his shotgun above his head to keep it dry. His flashlight beam danced wildly as he struggled forward, illuminating nightmare glimpses of the swamp. Moss like hanged men, roots like grasping hands, eyes that glowed briefly in the darkness, and then vanished. He didn't let himself think about what those eyes belonged to. The scream came again, closer now, and with it another sound, that wet, rhythmic splashing he'd heard before. Something was moving through the water ahead of him. Something big. Kyle burst into a clearing and saw the cabin. It stood on stilts above the flood, a single light flickering in one window. A candle, maybe, or a lantern. On the porch, a woman was pressed against the door, screaming, while something dark and massive circled the structure in the water below. He couldn't see it clearly. The rain and the darkness and his own terror conspired to keep it shapeless, formless, just a movement in the water, a wrongness that his eyes refused to focus on, but he saw enough. He saw the size of it. He saw the way the water parted around it. He saw, for one impossible moment, something that might have been a face turning toward him. A face with too many teeth, too many angles, eyes that reflected his flashlight beam like a cat's, but wrong, all wrong. Kyle raised the shotgun and fired. The blast was deafening. The thing in the water shrieked. That same howl he'd heard before, but louder, closer, furious. And then it was gone, diving beneath the surface, leaving only a wake of churning water in its path. "Get inside!" Kyle screamed at the woman. "Get inside and don't open the door!" He was running now, wading as fast as he could toward the cabin, expecting at any moment to feel something grab his legs and pull him under. The water fought him with every step. The rain blinded him. His heart was a war drum in his chest. He reached the cabin steps, pulled himself up. The woman, young, dark-haired, soaked and shaking, grabbed his arm and dragged him inside. They slammed the door together. For a long moment, there was only the sound of their breathing and the rain hammering the roof. Then the scratching started again. At the door, at the walls, at the windows, all at once, as if a dozen hands were testing the cabin's defenses simultaneously. Kyle. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, filtering through the cracks in the wood. His grandmother's voice, perfect in every detail. "Kyle, Cher, come out. Come out and play in the water like you used to. Don't you remember? Don't you remember how much you loved the swamp?" "That's not my grandmother," Kyle said, more to himself than to the woman beside him. "That's not anyone's grandmother." The scratching stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. No rain, no wind, no sound at all, as if the storm itself was holding its breath. Then, from directly outside the door, so close Kyle could have touched it through the wood, "I'll remember you, Kyle Brennan." The voice was no longer pretending. It was deep, ancient, hungry, a voice that had been speaking since before the Cajuns came, before the French came, before anyone had given this swamp a name. "I'll remember you both. And when you speak of this night, and you will speak of it, you won't be able to help yourselves. I'll come back. I always come back." Footsteps on the porch. Heavy, wet, wrong, moving away. Then nothing. Kyle and Samantha sat in the darkness of the cabin, listening to the storm return, neither of them saying a word. They stayed that way until dawn, when the rain finally stopped and the water began to recede. They didn't speak of what had happened, not to each other, not to the rescue team that found them, not to anyone. The official report listed it as a weather-related rescue. A lost hiker, a rookie ranger, a storm that had pushed conditions beyond safe limits. Samantha Ortiz recovered her grandfather's photograph and was at her grandmother's bedside when Lucille finally passed 3 days later. She never told anyone why she woke screaming some nights, or why she refused to visit Louisiana ever again. Kyle Brennan finished his probationary period and requested a transfer to a different park. The request was denied. Budget cuts, staff shortages. He still works at Barataria. He still patrols the trails. He still answers calls about lost hikers and stranded tourists. But he doesn't work during storms anymore. And he never ever goes out alone after dark. It's been 6 years since that night. Neither of them has spoken about what happened. Neither of them knows how many days are left until 101. Location: Isle Royale National Park, Michigan. Date: October 27th, 2011. The lake had been talking all morning. Andrew Vance stood on the dock at Rock Harbor, watching the swells roll in from the northeast, each wave a little higher than the last, a little angrier. Lake Superior didn't give warnings the way other bodies of water did. It didn't build gradually from calm to rough. It simply decided somewhere in its cold and fathomless heart that today would be a day for taking. And then it took. He'd been with the Park Service for 11 years, the last 4 stationed at Isle Royale during the operational season from April through October. He knew the lake's moods better than he knew his own. The way the water changed color before a storm, from that impossible blue-green to something darker, something that swallowed light instead of reflecting it. The way the air pressure dropped and made your ears feel full, like descending in an airplane. The way the waves developed a particular rhythm, a heartbeat pulse that you could feel through the dock pilings if you stood still enough. Today, the lake was hungry. Vance, this is dispatch. Weather Service has upgraded the storm warning to a gale watch. We're initiating full evacuation. The Ranger 3 is making one final crossing at 1400 hours. All non-essential personnel need to be on that boat. Andrew keyed his radio. Copy that, dispatch. What about the research team at Feltman? A pause. Static. Then, we've been trying to reach them since 0900. No response. Their satellite phone goes straight to voicemail. Andrew felt the first cold finger of unease trace down his spine. The Feltman Lake area was on the far southwestern tip of the island, nearly 20 miles from Rock Harbor by trail. By water in the patrol boat, he could reach the nearest landing point at Grace Harbor in about 90 minutes, under normal conditions. With swells building to 10 feet and worse coming, it would be a rough crossing, maybe impossible by afternoon. I'll take the patrol boat around to Grace Harbor, he said. Check on them, get them to the Ranger 3 before departure. Negative, Vance. Conditions are deteriorating too fast. We can't authorize. Those are 2 researchers who might be in trouble, and I'm the only Ranger left on the island. I'm going. He released the transmit button before dispatch could argue further. The patrol boat was a 24-foot aluminum craft with twin outboards, designed for the unpredictable waters of Superior. Andrew had piloted it through rough weather before, though nothing quite like what the forecast was promising. He ran through his mental checklist as he prepped the vessel. Life jackets secured, emergency beacon charged, radio batteries fresh, bilge pump operational. The fuel tank was full. The GPS showed clear coordinates to Grace Harbor. He cast off the mooring lines and eased the throttle forward, pointing the bow toward the open water beyond the harbor's protective embrace. The moment he cleared the breakwater, the lake reminded him who was in charge. The first wave hit the hull like a fist, sending spray across the windscreen and nearly knocking Andrew off his feet. He braced himself against the console and adjusted his heading, angling into the swells rather than taking them broadside. The boat climbed each wave with a groaning shudder, hung suspended at the crest for a sickening moment, then plunged down the far side into the trough. Again, again, again. The sky had darkened considerably since morning. What had been overcast gray was now the color of a bruise. Purple-black clouds pressing down from the northwest, trailing curtains of rain that swept across the distant water like searching fingers. The wind had shifted, coming now from the north-northwest, pushing the swells into confused cross patterns that made the boat pitch and roll unpredictably. Andrew checked his GPS. 12 miles to Grace Harbor. At this speed, in these conditions, that meant over 2 hours of fighting the lake every inch of the way. He thought about Kevin Marsh and Trevor Dunlop, the 2 graduate students from Michigan Tech who'd been conducting wolf population surveys at Feltman for the past 3 weeks. Young guys, mid-20s, enthusiastic about their work, but not particularly experienced with Superior's autumn moods. They'd probably looked at the forecast this morning and decided to wait it out, not realizing how fast conditions could change, how quickly manageable became deadly on this lake. Or maybe they hadn't looked at the forecast at all. Cell coverage was non-existent on most of the island, and satellite phones only worked if you remembered to turn them on. The radio crackled. Patrol boat. Your position. Dispatch, this is Vance. I'm approximately 4 miles west of Rock Harbor en route to Grace Harbor. Conditions are rough but manageable. I should reach the Feltman team within 2 hours. Breaking up. Repeat. Static swallowed the transmission. Andrew tried again, but the only response was a wash of white noise that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the waves. He was alone. Kevin had known something was wrong since yesterday. It started with the sounds, or rather the absence of sounds. Isle Royale was never truly quiet. There was always the wind in the trees, the lap of waves against the rocky shore, the howl of wolves in the distance that had become so familiar over 3 weeks that he barely noticed it anymore. But yesterday afternoon, while he and Trevor were checking camera traps along the Feltman Ridge Trail, the forest had gone silent. Not gradually, not the way it does when a predator passes through. Instantly, completely, as if someone had pressed a mute button on the entire world. Trevor had noticed it too. "That's weird," he'd said, looking around at the motionless trees. No birds. They'd stood there for perhaps 30 seconds, listening to nothing. Then, from somewhere down toward the lake, Feltman Lake, not Superior, the small inland body of water their camp overlooked, they'd heard something else. A sound that didn't belong. It was like a voice, but not human. Low and resonant, somewhere between a growl and a purr, rising and falling in patterns that almost sounded like words. Almost, but not quite. The hair on Kevin's arms had stood up, and he'd felt a sudden, irrational urge to run. "Probably just ice cracking on the lake," Trevor had said, though his voice was uncertain. "You know how sound carries out here." But it was October. The lake wasn't frozen. Wouldn't be for another month at least. They'd hurried back to camp without discussing it further, and that night Kevin had dreamed of water. Not drowning, something different. He'd dreamed of sinking slowly through water that was warm instead of cold, water that glowed with a faint copper light. And at the bottom of that water something had been waiting. Something huge, something ancient, something that had opened eyes the color of oxidized metal and looked at him with an intelligence that made his human mind feel small and temporary. He'd woken with his heart pounding and the absolute certainty that something was watching the camp from the tree line. Now sitting in the research tent with the wind howling outside and the satellite phone stubbornly refusing to connect, Kevin couldn't shake the feeling that they'd made a terrible mistake by staying. "We should have left yesterday," he said. Trevor looked up from his laptop where he was trying to organize camera trap data despite the failing battery. "The forecast didn't look this bad yesterday. Besides, we're fine. The tent's rated for 60-mile-an-hour winds. Worst case, we ride it out for a day or two until the Rangers can get to us." The Rangers, right. Kevin moved to the tent's small window, really just a clear plastic panel sewn into the fabric, and looked out at Feltman Lake. The water was choppy even here, in this sheltered inland pool. Whitecaps forming and dissolving in the gray light. Beyond the lake, the ridge rose toward the interior of the island, thick with spruce and birch that bent and swayed in the wind like dancers following music only they could hear. "Hey, Trev, come look at this." Trevor set down his laptop and joined him at the window. "What am I looking at?" "The water. Watch the surface." They watched. The waves moved predictably at first, wind-driven, chaotic, normal. But then Kevin saw what had caught his attention. Near the center of the lake, perhaps 200 yards from shore, the water was behaving differently. The waves there seemed to spiral inward toward a central point, like water draining from a bathtub. But there was no drain. There was nothing there at all. Except, was there? Kevin squinted through the rain-spattered plastic. For just a moment he thought he saw something breach the surface, something large and dark, covered in what looked like scales that caught the faint light with a metallic gleam. Then it was gone, and the water resumed its normal pattern. "Did you see that?" Kevin's voice was barely a whisper. "See what?" "The waves?" There was something in the water, something big. Trevor was quiet for a moment. Then, "Kevin, there's nothing in that lake bigger than a pike. It's a landlocked body of water, maybe 40 acres. If there was something big living in there, the researchers before us would have documented it." Kevin wanted to believe him. He wanted to believe that what he'd seen was a trick of the light, a shadow, a piece of debris blown into the water by the wind. But he couldn't stop thinking about his dream, about the copper glow, about the eyes. "Maybe we should move to higher ground," he said. "Just to be safe. In this wind, we'd be more likely to get killed by a falling tree. No, we stay here. We wait for the storm to pass, and tomorrow we radio for extraction." Trevor clapped him on the shoulder with forced cheerfulness. "Relax, man. It's just weather." Kevin nodded, but he didn't turn away from the window. Out on the lake, the spiral had reappeared. Tighter this time, closer to shore, and this time he was certain he saw something rise from its center, a shape like a serpent or a long tail covered in spines that caught the gray light like rows of knives. It descended back into the water without a splash. The lake's surface went calm. Perfectly, impossibly calm, while the wind tore at the trees just yards from its shore. Kevin opened his mouth to say something, to scream maybe, but the words died in his throat, because now, from somewhere deep beneath that unnaturally still water, he could hear it again. That voice, that not quite voice, rising and falling like a song in a language older than human speech. And this time, it sounded like it was saying his name. Andrew had been fighting the lake for nearly 2 hours when he saw the first boat. It appeared out of the rain curtain like a ghost, an aluminum fishing vessel, maybe 16 feet, drifting sideways in the swells with no one at the helm. Andrew cut his throttle and approached cautiously, fighting to keep his own boat stable in the confused seas. "Hello. Anyone aboard?" The fishing boat rose on a wave, giving him a clear view of the deck. Empty. No fishing gear, no safety equipment, no sign that anyone had ever been aboard at all. But that wasn't what made Andrew's blood run cold. It was the marks on the hull. 4 parallel gouges, each perhaps an inch deep, ran along the port side from bow to stern. They looked like claw marks, like something massive had reached up from below and raked the boat's aluminum skin with talons the size of hunting knives. Andrew grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Vance. I found an abandoned vessel approximately 2 miles northeast of Grace Harbor. 16-foot aluminum fishing boat, no registration visible, no persons aboard. The hull shows signs of significant damage. There may be someone in the water. I'm initiating a search pattern." Static answered him, the same pulsing static that seemed to have a rhythm, a cadence like something breathing just beneath the frequency. He tried again. Nothing. Andrew looked back at the damaged boat, now drifting farther away as the swells carried it southeast. He should pursue it. Document the registration, radio the Coast Guard, initiate proper missing persons protocols. That was procedure, but Kevin and Trevor were still out there, and the storm was getting worse by the minute. He made his choice. He opened the throttle and pointed the bow toward Grace Harbor, leaving the ghost boat to drift into the gray. 20 minutes later, he rounded the point that sheltered Grace Harbor from the worst of Superior's fury. The small cove was relatively calm compared to the open water, swells of 3 or 4 feet instead of 10 or 12. Andrew maneuvered toward the dock, cut the engines, and jumped ashore to tie off the mooring lines. The rain had intensified, coming down now in sheets that reduced visibility to maybe 50 yards. The wind howled through the trees with a sound like screaming. Andrew pulled his rain jacket tighter and started up the trail toward Feltman Lake. It was a 2-mile hike under normal conditions. In this weather, on a trail that had become a river of mud and debris, it took nearly an hour. Andrew pushed through hanging branches, climbed over fallen trees, and twice had to stop and reorient when the trail became indistinguishable from the surrounding forest. But he kept moving. Because somewhere in the back of his mind, in a place he didn't like to visit, something was telling him to hurry. That time was running out. That the lake had already started taking. He smelled the camp before he saw it. A strange smell. Copper and ozone and something else, something organic and ancient like the bottom of a body of water that hadn't been disturbed in 1,000 years. The smell of things that lived in darkness. The smell of depth. The research tent came into view through the rain. It was still standing, barely, the fabric bowed inward by the wind, but the frame holding. Andrew approached slowly, his hand moving instinctively to the bear spray on his belt. "Kevin? Trevor? This is Park Ranger Andrew Vance. I'm here to evacuate you." No response. He circled the tent, looking for signs of the researchers. Their equipment was still inside. He could see it through the plastic window. Laptops, cameras, sample cases, a half-eaten granola bar on a folding table, 2 sleeping bags still rolled out on their foam pads. But no people. Andrew unzipped the tent flap and stepped inside. Everything was orderly, undisturbed. No signs of struggle. No indication that anything was wrong at all except for the absence of the 2 men who were supposed to be here. And the water. There was water on the floor of the tent. Not rain. The tent was waterproof, and there were no leaks in the ceiling. This water had come from somewhere else. It pooled in the center of the space, perhaps a gallon, perhaps more, and in it floated tiny flakes of something that glittered with a coppery sheen. Andrew knelt and dipped his fingers into the pool. The water was ice cold, far colder than the rain outside, and when he raised his fingers to examine the residue, he found that the flakes weren't flakes at all. They were scales, fish scales, or something like fish scales, each one the size of his thumbnail, iridescent with colors that shifted from copper to green to black depending on the angle of the light. He'd never seen anything like them. He'd spent his entire career on Superior's shores, had documented dozens of fish species, had studied the lake's ecology with the dedication of someone who understood that his life depended on understanding this body of water. These scales didn't belong to anything he'd ever seen. They didn't belong to anything that lived in these waters. They didn't belong to anything that should exist at all. Kevin had been running for what felt like hours. He didn't know where Trevor was. They'd been together when it came out of the water. That massive, impossible shape rising from the lake like something from a fever dream. All copper scales and dagger spines and eyes that glowed with their own inner light. Trevor had screamed. Kevin had screamed. And then they'd run in different directions because the thing was fast, faster than anything that size had any right to be. And the only hope was to split up and pray it chose the other one. God forgive him, he'd hoped it chose Trevor. Now he was somewhere in the forest, rain hammering down, wind tearing at his clothes, and he could hear it behind him. Not chasing, not exactly. Following, moving through the underbrush with a sound like water flowing, like a stream finding its way downhill, inevitable and patient. "Please," Kevin gasped. He didn't know who he was pleading with. God, maybe. Or the thing itself. "Please, I didn't know. I didn't mean to what?" He didn't know. He hadn't done anything except exist in the wrong place at the wrong time, except camp beside a lake that belonged to something older than his species' entire existence. The stories. His grandmother had told him stories when he was young. She was Ojibwe from the Red Cliff Band, and she'd grown up with the old tales. Tales about Mishipeshu, the underwater panther, the spirit that ruled the depths of the Great Lakes. She'd told him to always give thanks to the water before taking fish, to never swim in certain places where the current pulled wrong, to respect the lake, because the lake had teeth. He hadn't believed her. He'd grown up. He'd become a scientist. He'd stopped believing in anything he couldn't measure. But belief didn't matter, did it? Belief didn't change what was real. Kevin burst through a stand of birch trees and found himself at the edge of a cliff. Below, maybe 100 feet down, the waters of Lake Superior churned and crashed against rocks that jutted from the waves like broken teeth. The spray reached up toward him, cold and tasting of iron. He spun around. The forest behind him had gone quiet. The wind still blew, the rain still fell, but there was no sound of pursuit. No flowing water, no movement in the trees. For a long moment, Kevin stood at the cliff's edge, chest heaving, telling himself that he'd imagined it all, that Trevor was fine, that they would laugh about this later, about how the isolation and the storm had gotten to them, made them see things that weren't there. Then the water below him began to glow. It started as a faint luminescence, copper-green light filtering up from the depths. the waves smoothed as if pressed flat by an invisible hand. And from that impossible calm, something rose. It was vast. The head alone was larger than the research tent. A feline skull stretched to nightmare proportions with antlers or horns or spines branching from its brow like a corrupted crown. The body that followed was serpentine, covered in scales that caught the eldritch light and threw it back in patterns that hurt to look at. A tail the length of a school bus thrashed behind it, lined with spines that glinted like copper blades. And the eyes, those copper fire eyes, ancient and intelligent and utterly inhuman, looking at Kevin with something that might have been hunger, or curiosity, or recognition. "What are you?" Kevin whispered. The creature's mouth opened. Rows of teeth, not sharp like a shark's, but flat and grinding like something meant to crush bone, glistened with water and something darker. And when it spoke, the sound bypassed his ears entirely and resonated somewhere in the center of his skull. "I am the keeper. I am the deep. I was here before your people named these waters, and I will be here long after your bones are dust." Kevin felt something warm running down his face. Blood, maybe. The pressure of that voice felt like it might burst the vessels in his brain. Or tears. Probably tears. "Please," he said again. "I just want to go home." Home. The word echoed in his mind like a stone dropped in still water, rippling outward through his thoughts. "Yes, I will take you home, down where it is quiet, where the light does not reach, where you will serve the deep forever." The creature lunged. Kevin didn't jump so much as fall, backward, away from those crushing jaws, over the edge of the cliff and into the churning water below. The cold hit him like a hammer. The waves closed over his head, and the last thing he saw before the darkness took him was that copper glow descending toward him, patient as gravity, old as stone. The lake claimed its own. Andrew found Trevor's body at the edge of Feltman Lake. He was face down in the shallow water, half on the rocky shore and half submerged. Andrew waded in and turned him over, already knowing what he would find. The young man's eyes were open, staring at nothing. His face was locked in an expression of absolute terror, but there were no wounds, no marks of any kind, no indication of how he had died. Except for the scales. They covered Trevor's skin like a second layer, thousands of them, copper green and iridescent, adhering to every inch of exposed flesh. When Andrew touched one, it came away on his fingertip, cold as ice, hard as metal. He keyed his radio with shaking hands. "Dispatch, this is Vance. I've located one of the researchers. He's deceased, cause of death unknown. I'm unable to locate the second researcher. I need immediate assistance, over." For a long moment only static answered, then faintly a voice broke through. But it wasn't dispatch. It was his mother's voice. His mother, who had died 6 years ago. "Andrew, baby, come down to the water. It's warm here. It's safe. You'll never be cold again." Andrew dropped the radio like it had burned him. Out on Feltman Lake, the water had begun to glow. He ran. The patrol boat was where he'd left it, rocking violently against the dock at Grace Harbor as the storm reached its full fury. Andrew untied the mooring lines with fingers that felt like someone else's, his mind a static-filled void that refused to process what he'd seen. Trevor, covered in scales. That voice on the radio. The glow beneath the water. The stories. Andrew had heard them too. Everyone who worked the Great Lakes eventually heard them. The old fisherman who talked about something in the deep, something that rose during storms, something that had been worshipped by the native peoples long before Europeans arrived, something that still demanded tribute. Mishi Peshu, the underwater panther, the keeper of copper, the lord of the deep. He'd thought they were stories, campfire tales to scare greenhorns and tourists. He didn't think that anymore. The boat's engines roared to life, and Andrew pointed the bow toward the open water. The waves were massive now, 15 feet, maybe more, but they didn't seem as chaotic as before. They seemed organized, channeled. like the lake was creating a path for him, guiding him somewhere specific. He fought the wheel, trying to turn toward Rock Harbor, toward the Ranger 3 that might still be waiting. But the swells resisted him. Every time he changed course, a wave would knock the bow back onto the original heading. Southeast. The waves were taking him southeast, toward the middle of the lake, toward the deepest water. Andrew's radio crackled, Trevor's voice this time, young, friendly, impossibly alive. "Hey, Ranger Vance. It's nice down here. Kevin's here too. We're not cold anymore. Come join us. The keeper wants to meet you." Andrew ripped the radio from its mount and hurled it into the water. The lake accepted the offering without a splash. For 20 minutes, he fought. He fought the waves, fought the wind, fought the current that pulled his boat steadily away from shore. The engines screamed, the hull groaned, and still, the water carried him deeper into the gray. Then, all at once, the storm stopped, not gradually, not dying down. It simply ended. The wind cutting off mid-howl, the rain ceasing like a faucet turned off, the waves flattening into impossible calm. Andrew's boat drifted to a stop in water that looked like black glass, surrounded by a wall of churning clouds that rose on all sides like the rim of a bowl. He was in the eye, but not the eye of a natural storm. He was in something's eye. The water beneath the boat began to glow. Andrew watched as the light rose from the depths, copper and green, shifting and pulsing in patterns that almost resembled music. The light grew brighter, closer, and with it came that sound, that voice, that resonance in his chest that felt like a second heartbeat. "You came for the lost ones." The words formed in his mind without passing through his ears. "You carry the weight of those you could not save. I tasted in your thoughts. So many drowned, so many taken by my waters while you watched from shore." Andrew thought of all the bodies he'd pulled from Superior over 11 years, the kayakers who capsized in sudden squalls, the fishermen whose boats went down in conditions they'd underestimated, the hikers who fell from cliffs, their bodies eventually washing up on beaches miles from where they entered the water. So many. Too many. You wonder if you could have done more, if you are to blame. "What are you?" Andrew's voice came out as a croak. The glow intensified. Something vast shifted in the darkness below. A shape so large that its movement created ripples on the calm surface. Ripples that spread outward toward the storm wall and vanished into the churning clouds. "I am the price. I am the deep. Every lake has its keeper. Every depth has its lord." The shape rose. Andrew saw the head first, that massive feline skull, those burning copper eyes, those antlers of bone and metal reaching toward the sky. Then the body, serpentine and scaled, longer than his boat, longer than any creature had a right to be. The tail followed, thick with spines that caught the glow and threw it back as blinding brilliance. The creature surfaced completely, and for one impossible moment it floated there, suspended on water that should not have supported its weight, looking down at Andrew with an intelligence older than human civilization. The young ones trespassed. They camped beside my sacred water without offering, without respect. I claimed what was owed. "They didn't know," Andrew heard himself say. "They didn't know you were real." Ignorance is not innocence. The creature's tail swept through the water, and a wave lifted Andrew's boat, spinning it like a toy. He grabbed the console and held on as the world became a chaos of sky and water and copper light. When the boat stabilized, the creature had circled behind him. Its head was perhaps 10 feet away, close enough that Andrew could see the individual scales, each one etched with patterns that looked almost like writing, close enough to see his own reflection in those burning eyes. "You are different. You have given to the lake. Your respect. Your years. Your grief for those the waters claimed." The creature's mouth opened, revealing that cavern of grinding teeth. "I will let you leave. Once. Carry a message to those who walk the shores. The lake remembers, the lake hungers, and the lake will take what it is owed." Andrew nodded. He couldn't speak. His voice had abandoned him along with his disbelief in monsters. Go. The storm wall collapsed inward. The waves returned, but now they were pushing him, carrying him, driving the boat toward the distant shore with a force that no natural current could match. Andrew gripped the wheel and let the lake take him, because fighting was pointless, because the lake would do what it wanted, because he understood now that he had always been a guest in something else's home. 20 minutes later, his boat ground against the beach at Rock Harbor. The Ranger 3 was gone, departed hours ago probably. But there were people on the dock. Rangers, Coast Guard, faces he recognized, shouting questions he couldn't hear over the ringing in his ears. Someone wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. Someone else was asking him about Kevin and Trevor. Gone, Andrew said. His voice sounded like it belonged to a dead man. They're gone. The lake took them. What do you mean the lake took them? What happened out there? Andrew looked back at the water. The storm was already dying, the waves settling, the clouds beginning to break apart, the first weak rays of sunlight filtering through. Soon it would look like any other autumn day on Superior, beautiful, peaceful, safe. But Andrew could still see the glow beneath the surface, faint now, retreating to the depths, but there, waiting. The lake, he said again. The lake is hungry. It's always been hungry. And we've been living on its shore, thinking we were in control, thinking our boats and our radios and our rescue protocols meant anything at all. He laughed, a broken, hollow sound. We're not in control. We never were. The lake decides who lives and who drowns. The lake takes what it wants. And the only reason any of us survive is because it lets us. The official report listed Kevin Marsh and Trevor Dunlop as victims of exposure following an equipment failure that left them stranded during the October 27th storm. Their bodies were never recovered, not unusual for Superior, which rarely gave back what it claimed. The lake was simply too deep, too cold, too vast. Andrew Vance requested a transfer to Guadalupe Mountains National Park in Texas 3 weeks after the incident. Desert, dry air, no water deeper than a stock tank. The request was approved. But some nights, even in the desert, Andrew dreams of copper light. He dreams of water that is warm instead of cold, of depths that go on forever, of something ancient and patient waiting in the darkness below. He dreams of Trevor and Kevin standing on a lake bed that should be black as night, but glows with eldritch luminescence, their eyes empty, their mouths moving in unison, speaking words he can't quite hear. He always wakes before he understands what they're saying. He's grateful for that. On his last day at Isle Royale before boarding the ferry to the mainland, Andrew walked down to the Rock Harbor dock one final time. The lake was calm that morning, deceptively calm, the way it always looked between storms, between takings. He stood at the water's edge and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small copper coin he'd carried since childhood, a gift from his grandfather, who'd worked the iron ranges and understood that you always paid your debts to the land. Andrew tossed the coin into the water. For them, he said. For Kevin and Trevor. Let them rest. The coin sank. The ripples spread and faded, and from somewhere far below, so far that it might have been imagination, might have been memory, might have been the echo of a dream, he heard a sound like laughter. The lake accepted the offering. The lake always accepts. But the lake never gives anything back.